All right, hello. Good afternoon. Wake up. My name's Mike Laustelot, and the first thing I'd like to say is thank you for being here today. And everyone in the back row needs to move up to the front row, please. Okay? There'll be no pot shots from the back row today. I have the great privilege and honor of being here today with three members of the PGA of America who all have built or are in the process of building incredible careers in the golf business. And before I introduce them and before we talk, hi Paul, how are you? Before we dive into it, the idea here today is for this to be a conversation about how their journey in the PGA in their career has been affected by data, how they use the data day in and day out, and really that's it, right? It's intended to be conversational. It is. We happily would ask any questions or clarifications when you have them. If I were to, the question that we always try to answer when we're together with audience is you're always asking this question, why do I care? And we're trying to answer the question, why you should care, what it means to you. And, we're talking about examples today and how it helps these gentlemen do their job. And of course, the job portion is diverse, very diverse. And so, I want to focus on those who help them in their journey and also who, in turn, they're helping along the way as well. So, like I said before, my name is Mike Laustelot. Our company is called Sagacity Golf. We have the good fortune of being in a partnership with the PGA of America to provide an operational benchmark report for the industry, both public and private courses. And it's intended to be really your first step into sharing data, understanding data, being able to explain the performance of your golf course in the context of the marketplace. And that's our partnership with the PGA. We have a for-profit business that is about really helping golf courses make more money, the bottom line. And Eric and I will talk about that today. Eric is the general manager at Monarch Beach Golf Links in Orange County, California. He's also the current president of the Southern California chapter of the PGA. Did I get that right, Eric?
Section, but I get it. I am the president. Yes, sir.
You are the president of the section. Forgive me. Bookending me over here is Dr. Jim Butler. I'm another PGA member. He'll talk more about himself in a second and about club benchmarking, but he's the CEO of Club Benchmarking and partnering with Sagacity to help bring some insights from his business, from the club benchmarking business, into the PGA operations benchmark platform.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Go
ahead.
Introduce Rob for us.
All right, we have my good friend here, Rob. Rob's the general manager at Royal Palm down in Boca Raton, Florida, and Rob Oosterhuis, and he's been on both coasts, which I think is very unique. But Rob is a fantastic customer of club benchmarking and utilizes many of our services, and we're going to dive in today and talk about that. On how he uses that, how that's helped his career, and kind of how his career development has had a data piece to that as we go forward. In terms of our company, Ray Cronin is here. He's walking around. I know he's outside. I saw he had a phone on. He's the founder of the company, and I was a customer of Club Benchmarking, and the first time that I saw Ray talk, after about 20 minutes, I was like, holy crap, he knows more about my business than I know about my business. And I attached myself at the hip to Ray and learned about the business. And when I knew I wanted to do one more, either a career development or have some equity in a company, I said to Ray and Russ, would you think about expanding into some of the operational issues as we go forward? And I'll talk about that journey as we go forward. And Rob, if you can talk a little bit about yourself.
As you mentioned, both coasts, although when I came to Florida and people talked about the West Coast, they were talking about Naples, and I was talking about Los Angeles, so let's make sure we know which coast we're talking about. Again, I've had a really interesting journey, probably started the same as a lot of people in this room, golf professional, wanted to be a director of golf, initially wanted to be a great instructor, and then moved into the business of golf, which I really fell in love with, and then stepped along from there and got into the general manager role. And again, I was just telling Jim Butler that there's actually a lot of people in this room that I have to thank for a lot of things. And one of them's in the back there, Paul Levy, and I have to thank him for not giving me a job that I applied for, because I think I'd still be a director of golf in Palm Springs, Palm Desert area. But it's again, my journey is similar to yours, different than a lot of yours. Data has really been where I've sort of feel like I've grown professionally in the last, call it half dozen to 10 years. You sit in a boardroom, and it's really no different than if you're sitting talking to the management company that you work for, if you're talking to the private owner, if you're talking to the city, government entity, whoever you might be working for. Being armed with that data, and again, we'll touch more on that, but being armed with that data, being able to know what you know, and maybe more importantly, know what you don't know, really can help differentiate yourself as not only in that room, but also as you're going on to find other jobs.
Awesome.
I just want to make a note of this, that he and I were both teammates at UCLA on the golf team together. Mm-hmm. And Rob obviously works in the high-end private space, and that's why he's dressed so nicely. And I'm in the resort space, and that's why I'm wearing Jordans. So we've kind of got
Whatever
different
works.
paths, buddy. Sorry.
$1,000 Jordans.
These might be, but we're not here to talk about my shoe collection.
You brought it up. I did. Give us some more about Eric Lohamn.
Sure. I've been in running golf courses now, like in the Orange County space, for 20 years. I've worked for several management companies, most of them, I think, and by now I work for Troon, so I think we own most of the ones that I worked for. In about 20 years ago, I did open up a golf course in Orange County called Black Gold Golf Club for Kemper Sports. At that time, I was hired as the director of golf and director of sales and marketing, which I think is a pretty rare combination. You don't see that very often, and that's because I had just spent the previous 3 or 4 years being a director of sales and marketing out in the desert at a club for OB Sports. And if you take a look at like what I do today at Monarch Beach Golf Links, and that we talk about revenue management being so key. I've literally just spent the last 10 years at this Waldorf Astoria 5-star resort, which is owned by, this our third owner that I've taken on. And if you go back one more job, I used to work for the Irvine Company. So I've worked for 4 financial institutions for my last 12 years. So I interact with asset managers and, analysts. I deal way more in analytics than I ever did. If I go back to Black Gold 20 years ago, it was what we do today compared to what we did then is so off the charts different. It's hard to explain it. But today, or even this week.
Give me an example.
Well, 20 years ago, you probably, if in our space, the daily fee space, the resort space, you could probably out-market somebody. You could outsell them. You could try to win, because to me it's all a game, right? There's a game, it's a budget. We're trying to achieve budget. We're trying to make our owners happy. We're trying to make our clients happy. And we do that by achieving budget and staying relatively fiscally solvent. So the tools that we use today, the way we analyze our business today is just off the charts different. I like the analogy I was going to use is somebody, like I introduced myself to somebody like 2-3 hours ago, and as a joke I said, I'm the revenue manager of a 5-star resort. That's what I do. And that's really what my job now is. Like, I'm a revenue manager. And if you asked me 5 years ago, I would have said I was a sales and marketing person. Mm-hmm. That's what I really hung my hat on. Mm-hmm. And now it's really about diving deep into the analytics, like that you all provide from Sagacity. I am one of the original course operators that have utilized Sagacity for many, many years.
And Eric uses our entire suite of products, including our human capital, very well.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so we, obviously Sagacity has a revenue manager on our property, Jason Brill, who supports us. And Jason and I talk maybe twice a week. We email and text each other, half a dozen times a week. We literally, he's in our business, and we utilize the tools that we need to. But because we have embraced Sagacity, and because we've embraced the tools that are available to us, we now have created a new culture, and that culture is the analytical, to be in that side of the space. So when I now go to a meeting and I'm across from, somebody from Harvard or, Stanford, who that's what these people do, that's what they've been educated, I can have a conversation with them on a different level, not just as a PGA member, not just as a general manager of a club I have 110 employees, I have HR issues, I have everything else you have.
Yeah.
But they care about one thing, and I care about it too, and I can speak the language with them.
Yeah.
And the tools that have been provided and the way that we now take even what you do, the Sagacity tools, and then expand on it, it's just so night and day.
So you talk about a goal for 2023. For the last couple of years, your stated goal from a operational revenue management perspective has been to change your mix of play, right,
Yep.
and drive a higher average rate, right?
Right. I mean, obviously, in the sales and marketing space, we had like Allegiant cards. We sold tournaments. We have membership categories. We have resort guests. We have different types of resort guests. But what we've done is we've now broken down every single category, every single hour of the day, how far out in advance they book, and we started mixing, because at some point we reached sort of capacity. We were actually there. COVID has been a blessing and a curse for all of us, but we were already at capacity before COVID. But what we weren't at capacity of was probably achieving the proper average rate to drive the margin that we needed to do, to have the correct flow through so that our EBITDA and our net operating income would be to the level that it is today. So we, as a team, because Sagacity to me is, I look at Mike, I've known Mike forever, but Jason and I, he's as important to me, to my operation, as my director of golf, assistant general manager, as my superintendent, because it's what's important to our ownership group. But we did a deep dive into all this, and we came out of it that we needed to adjust, to be honest with you, 100 things. We did that. We've grown average rate. COVID did help with sort of the processes. But what COVID taught me, or what we gained out of COVID, or what we learned from this process, is that, one, when COVID started, because we weren't as advanced as we are today, we lost $1 million the first year of COVID. Net income, $1 million.
That's it.
And at a 10-time ratio, that's $10 million of value that we left on the table, because what we were doing, we were analyzing it 2 years too late.
Yep.
And now, because we've done it, now we've rode the wave post-COVID. We've grown, we don't have to sit here to talk about it, but we have grown the value of our club. When I first took over 10 years ago, the value of the club might have been in, let's say, in the $10 million range. Our club right now is valued over $80 million for an 18-hole standalone property. So the owners have appreciated that and understand that, and that's like the direction we're going in.
How have you, on your staff, other PGA golf professionals, how are you helping them enter into this data journey and learn about revenue management?
Well, first off, as we all know, first of all, I had to become more of an expert because, when Jason and you all initially started speaking to some of these items, some of it was a little foreign, some of it seemed to be maybe a little redundant. It seemed to be like layering on more reporting. There's always a joke, if you work for a management company, there's a ton of reporting. Well, how about you just take what I used to do and times it by 10 now? But so I had to learn what I needed to learn more so I could speak to it correctly and understand the flow. Now what I do is, so we have a director of golf, assistant GM. He sort of owns the membership piece. My tournament, and by that I mean, he doesn't just help me market it and sell it and manage the events and make sure everybody's happy. He literally has to produce reports and then come back to me, and we review them on a monthly basis that we share at our revenue management meeting, that we use in our deck that we share with ownership, that speaks to the value of what that group represents.
And you're talking, when you talk about that, you talk about it in the context of the day of the week and the hour of the day that those rounds are being played too, correct? I mean,
Yeah.
that's...
We create avatars, and we need to figure out which avatars are most important to us for our business, and then we need to figure out how to get more of them,
Into the
the
slots you
correct
want.
avatar in the right slots.
yeah.
And that's the game that we play, and we've done an extremely good job with it. On the flip side, we also have a tournament director, tournament salespeople, so I'm having to teach them the same measurement. So we utilize your tools to book. Not only do we use your tools to help us price events and make them good, smart decisions, but because now we've created this culture, we look at, like, again, this avatar, the tournament avatar is worth so much money. We have to know what that person's really worth, and then how do we drive more income from that person? Our tournament group, our tournament people are about a $350 a person per round value. Just like our card holder is about a $200 value. So then we got to figure out how do you get more of the tournament people in the right spot and the other people in the other spot and do it correctly. And when we analyzed all the data, we discovered huge low-hanging fruit that we were able to adjust and be profitable. Part of it was because I sat across from an owner of a company who runs a huge, this is a huge investment company, and he told us we were wrong. And he told us you needed to analyze your data. When you get done analyzing it, you come back and we'll discuss it. And when we did, we went, oops, he was right.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, Eric, you kind of blew through that, every dollar is worth a multiple of that. Could you just explain that? Because I think a lot of people probably don't know what that means.
Well, if you've ever bought or sold a golf course, you look at your EBITDA or your net income, depending on how you want to look at it, and that produces your annual cash flow or your annual revenue. If you times it by 8 or you times it by 10, that essentially creates like a value for your property or what you could sell your golf course for. And there's different formulas to be used, but it's one of the greatest things I can say is that we took a golf course that produced, $500,000 in EBITDA, and now we're pushing $9 million. In EBITDA.
Beautiful.
So it's a big thing, and there is value because, like I said, I'm now working for the third owner of our resort. So at some point, I'll be working for the fourth and then the fifth. So they care about these things as they try to sell these resorts for $600-700 million.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a great example of how you use data. So Rob, is that the same business model that you're in? And why don't you talk a little bit about the club and some of the things that you manage and maybe some of the differences that you look at in terms of data?
Sure. Well, I explained this to somebody the other day. We were talking about a business very similar to Eric's, and they said, well, you run this not-for-profit business. And I said, well, at the end of the day, Eric's business and my business are just the same. They just, the goal line is moved in a different location. So, if we were in his business, we would set our pricing in a different fashion, and, we would have a slightly different group of metrics. Being at a private club where it's member-owned, and I should back up a little bit, I do have what I feel like is the advantage of, I worked for a public golf course initially, then I worked for a resort company where we were all about, to me, I learned that the revenue manager wasn't someone who wheeled a barrel of money around, which is what it sounded like to me at first. That person was probably one of the most important people on property from a business standpoint, probably the most important person on property from a business standpoint. And then I went to work for another company where we had a mix of resorts and public courses and a little bit of private, but it was really all for-profit businesses. So before Sagacity was a thing, this is 15 years ago, working in the San Diego market, it was all about how could you maximize yield and utilization of every tee sheet. So I really felt like I had that advantage, and we also, same thing with food and beverage. While I'd worked at Four Seasons and your average check is $50-60 in a restaurant without cocktails, then we go somewhere else where the average check of the snack bar at our par 3 course is $2.15. It's still, how do I turn $2.15 into $2.30? Like those are the challenges. So again, to me it's no matter where you work, it's just adjusting sort of your goal line where you're trying to go. Where we are at Royal Palm, member-owned, again, one of those weird things for those of you who aren't in a member-owned facility is my bosses are also my customers and my consumers. And I say I'm in a lot of different businesses. I say I'm in the entertainment business. I say I'm in the dues business. One of the things I'd say I'm in an emotional business, and that's one of the challenges that we deal with. How I use data. While Eric's having to prove himself, I'm having to stop runaway trains of people saying, well, let's shut down this restaurant, let's open a new restaurant, let's build this, let's not build that. And none of these are all C-suite type people. They're type A personalities. They've all been successful. And usually you can stop them when you say, is this how you ran your business when you guys were successful and you went for, you had a nine-figure business? How many zeros are after your bank account? But again, it's an emotional business, and people react emotionally. And I think that's where Jim at my current club and my previous club, Club Benchmarking, really helped us out a lot with giving data. And it's not just about the data of your business, but it's the data of business in context. And I use the word with our staff a lot, context, because you could just say, well, our average check is $35. Okay, what does that mean? Is that high? Is it low? Same thing, we're talking about food costs. We talk about food costs all the time. For those of you who want to be a general manager and aren't yet, just learn about food and beverage. I keep telling people that's going to be the big differentiator when you go in there for those interviews. Know about the business of food and beverage. That's what I was lucky enough for the company I worked for in San Diego, JC Resorts, and John McNair with JC Golf, there was a real hard focus on what are your food costs. And again, we're talking about not the biggest restaurants, we're talking about very small restaurants. And so I learned, again, what goes on the plate, okay, I have to have packets of salt, I have to price that out, okay, let's do that. And again, it sounds silly for some of you to think about, but again, it's no different than a golf shop, if you're pricing everything out, except now you're also dealing with a perishable inventory item. So it's a little different thing there.
Perishable other than your tea time inventory.
Right. Well, I'm just talking about retail. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah.
And if you talk about the business model of the resort is driven by that T sheet, what's the business model from a data standpoint and a business model of the private club?
Well, so that's what's the definition of success too? Because some people will talk about, well, we had a bad year because of how our P&L finished. Whereas Mr. Butler will come in and say, fantastic year. We sold a lot of memberships. Your net worth, your compound annual growth rate's been great. Again, it's really important that you understand what metrics are important, because it would be easy for me to go and say, oh, we made $100,000, even though we were kind of budgeting to only make $25,000 because we're a break-even model. But if in that model we don't sell any new memberships, but we spent a ton of capital dollars in a not appropriate way, that changes the model. So, for us, there's multiple metrics. There is the financial statement, but then there's the balance sheet, and which is something, again, for me, I've really had to embrace and get the board to focus on, which makes my life a lot easier if everybody's focused on the balance sheet. Because again, that's really, to me, we talk about in our boardroom, is that's playing the long game, that's planning for the future. I know we'll probably touch on strategic planning in a second, but it's those types of things about, okay, so what can you really afford? You talk about valuations of businesses. Dues is, again, I said I'm in the dues business too, but that really just helps the business go round and round for the year. It's not really about the overall health of the facility. I think I'm dying here. Did I answer your question? I finished? I think I was in the middle.
What kind of data do you use to do that to your board?
So again, we're using the balance sheet. We really try and focus on the membership ins and outs. We've now got to a point. Thanks. We've now got to a point, I think, where we look very little at the monthly P&L in our meetings. If there's a variance, and the good thing in the private club world, for the most part, if there's a big variance, you see it coming from quite a ways away. If Eric, I would imagine if you had 2 rainy weekends, that would be something you couldn't forecast until it actually happened. It was the same thing when I was working in San Diego and you had a rainy weekend. It was like, oh my God, there goes $40,000. From our standpoint, again, and Jim will can talk about this too in the food and beverage world. If we have a little more business, a little less business, it really doesn't move the needle in a meaningful way. But what moves the needle is who's matriculating into a new membership, what memberships are, what kind of attrition do you have, those types of things, and then talking more about your capital dollars too.
Yeah, so how do you make that transition if the language of business is finance, and I assume, do you have a finance degree?
Negative.
Negative. So you're a golf professional,
History major.
So how do you make that transition from day-to-day golf professional director of golf to GM, and how did data fit into that? Where'd you learn it?
I think the first step was just, again, admitting what I didn't know. You fake whatever you can until you learn enough, but not being afraid to ask questions. And, for me, I was lucky. I talked about John McNair, and I joke about Paul, but, he's been a fantastic mentor for me. Someone like Eric, the guys who I would see at the PGA meetings, and later on when I was involved in CMAA, finding allies in those rooms and going to talk to them and ask them what they're seeing, what they're going through. Typically, the problems that we're all seeing at our clubs, whether it be private or public or resort, is they're all the same problems. And for me, it's really important that I'm a mentor, to not just to my people and my staff, but everybody around me. Again, whatever sphere you're in, PGA, CMA, anybody, in the local Florida market's a great market for mentorship. So for me, it was about asking questions, and it was not being afraid when Ray Cronin's speaking to ask a question that I knew was probably dumb, but he was happy to answer. And then I realized, there's 50 other people in the audience that have the same question as I do.
Sure. And Eric, how about you? How'd you grow your knowledge base on data and metrics and all that?
It's a good question. I've been able to work, like I said, for these finance companies. So I learned a lot from those folks in those meetings, and then speaking to them offline. Also, because the last 15 years I've worked at 5-star resorts, and the resorts, golf, good or bad or indifferent, we're always sort of behind the curve in some of the things that are best practices, and resorts have used like the STAR report, crossover reports, how they forecast. Just a lot of this information, a lot of these tools that we use today, the resorts have already had, and these finance companies have already had them in play for 20, 25 years. So as I've been introduced to them, I certainly would have taken the time to learn why they're relevant, and then how do we apply them. And then you fast forward so many years, and a company like Sagacity shows up on your doorstep, and they actually do similar type things, and they can talk to you in a way that maybe I could understand it a little bit more easily.
We had the patience.
You have patience, and I have patience to learn. So, but it's just asking a lot of questions and kind of understanding the vernacular and what it is that they like to see and hear and talk about. But I can't only explain it as this: is if first you look at it, and it's could be unnerving if you haven't done it, or if that's not what you're well versed at. So you have to take a step back. You have to humble yourself, and you have to go, well, this could be important. This should be important. So then now, how do I apply myself, or how do I learn it? And then once you get into the culture of what this is, or if it becomes a general practice of what you do, you can then feed off of it. And I find myself doing things today. Last week, like I'm reviewing some information, and I'm running all these different reports, and as I'm looking through it, I was preparing a slide for a finance meeting that I have to have on Tuesday next week. And we did a look back at our the resort play, like how it produced for our club, the rounds that came from our resort, and the different pockets of where the rounds came from, and then the days they booked and the average rates. And then I went back 4 years. So as I created the report, I go, God, I got to go back another year. So I went back another year. Then I analyzed it for about 5 minutes and went, I can see where we're missing it. So then I called in these guys, the gentlemen I worked as pros, and I said, okay, we need to strategize a way to attack this particular silo in the next 60 days. Here's the game plan. So we created a game plan. We're going to redo a program. We're going to create new collateral. We're going to push it back out into the marketplace, and we're going to attack a certain thing at the right time. We're going to change it based on the analytics to then drive additional revenue, incremental revenue. and it'll hopefully help fill the gap and get us back to where we need to be.
Beautiful. Go ahead.
I just want to make a comment about that. That is what $9 million of EBITDA allows you to do, right? You represent a segment of the golf industry that not many clubs can attain. And with that, you have the luxury of being able to call on, to have the time to do the analytics, to have the time to talk to the other group, your team.
Yeah.
And
So when we started at Monarch, I think we had 60 employees. Now I have 110.
Yeah.
So the volume of revenue has helped us layer in more service, has helped me layer in more management. It's given me the freedom to have an assistant GM who can do more, and a director of golf who can do more of the fun stuff, right? The golf operations. And then I can literally just sit out here in a silo and play revenue management and a revenue manager, and to the point where I think it's effective. And like I said, by no means am I the ultimate expert in revenue management. I've created a culture to embrace it. I've learned about it. But what I do is I put it all on a nice little piece of paper. I make a little one sheet, and then I send it to Jason Brill at Sagacity, and then Jason Brill and I will talk through it. And he's like my check and balance, because the last thing I ever want to do is make a decision and then make an error or then go backwards. So I try to vet it a little bit, and then
how has this changed your role? Monarch Beach is a Troon managed facility, right? And so how has your experience at Monarch helped change your relationship at Troon?
Well, I mean, obviously, Troon is a big company, and they have a lot of great resources and a lot of great people that work for it. But there are some places that need a little bit more help creating a culture, embracing what we're talking about up here, whether it's on the private side and club benchmarking, or if it's on the public resort side of like Sagacity. So some of my assignments recently have been to work with my peers to educate them about what we've done and how we do it, and then to try to help them create their model. And we run into it, as you could imagine, with some people who fully embrace it. And they're great, because anybody who fully embraces a new idea, you tell them you'll be successful if you do this, and then they embrace it, and then they go do it, everybody wins, right? But not everybody approaches these conversations that way. You have some people who think they're an expert because they've been doing it forever, and they're probably an expert in something, but not in what we're talking about. And they kind of either half-ass adopt it, and that's the problem child. That's the people we have to help mitigate the problem. And then there's the people who just clearly are like the Moneyball equation, right? I just watched Moneyball the other night. It's a great movie, and
Please don't tell me for the first time.
No, my wife made the movie. So Moneyball, in the movie, if you remember, there was a scene where Brad Pitt plays Billy Bean, walks into a room, and there's all the scouts, and all the scouts are older, established, and they're talking about, this guy looks good, and this person, this is the way they talk about it. It's so old school, right? And then this guy brings in that funny guy, I can't remember his name, but Jonah Hill. Thank you, Captain. Brings in Jonah Hill, and it's all about the analytics. And I am now 110% gone from where I literally would say, I just knew it. I knew this is the right decision because I've done it long enough and it made sense, and this is what we should do. To the point where I don't even have to say that out loud. I'm just going to go run all these reports, review the analytics. It will tell me whether or not that's the case, and if it is, then I know I have the evidence and the backup and the confidence to move forward in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, so on the, using that's a great story of how to do that. So when we look in that South Florida market, your EBITDA or your net operating income in a not-for-profit club is zero. So we go over the capital side and the membership side. What kind of membership sales have you had the last couple of years in terms of dollars?
Well, this is a good story.
And what do you do with it, and how do you use data to decide where you're going to put that money and communicate with your board?
So we probably didn't use data enough, but we probably still made the right decisions, fortunately, although now we're at this sort of crossroads. So yeah, we've made, in the last 3 years, I think we're verging on $10 million in member initiation fees. We've used it really to pay down debt. There has been a little bit of little bit of putting money back in the club, and now we're getting ready to really to actually take on a bunch more debt now that we've paid down the debt to do some renovations. And I think this is where we, big part of the reason why, I worked with Jim and club benchmarking on a sort of a lower level, and now again, as Eric does, full disclosure, we've entered in an enterprise agreement with club benchmarking to use all of their offerings, because we think it's that important. And it's not just about having access to data and analysis, which is important, but it's about helping us with a strategic plan. And it's easy to say, well, we want to build this, this, and this, and this, but then it comes back to, great, well, how are you going to pay for that? And what does the future look like? And of course, you have to make some assumptions, and you have to do some future modeling. But we really, again, I'm stealing your marketing, but it's making just data-driven decisions. And again, now that we've had Jim come in, we've had him talk to the board, he's educated our committees. They're now really drinking the Kool-Aid, and more it's like, okay, we don't need to focus on operations. The experts have the operations. What are we going to do now with this money that we're having, or how are we going to fund these things that we want to do? And the great thing is not only I'm going to give you a little bit of a sales plug here too, but not only are we utilizing club benchmarking for that big picture stuff, we use it for our day-to-day type things as well. We are digging into it, much like Eric digs into it for the rounds. We use it for, again, things like industry metrics in terms of compensation, food and beverage, different types of other departments where you're trying to see, well, what is it should we do, and what should the profitability or the negative profitability be? And where I'm proud, and you talked about culture a lot, is we're starting to see now our managers coming to meetings and saying, instead of saying, I'd really like to do such and such, or I'd like to have this type of thing, they'd say, here's some data of what we've done in the past. Here's where I think we can improve upon it. Again, very different when you're talking about a social event versus a round of golf, but a lot of similarities. In terms of the long term, we're no different than any other private club where you get a group of people in a room who, with the best of intentions, try and make the right plans for the club, and then start broadcasting it out to everybody, but don't actually have a financial plan to back it up. So, as far as us with the initiation fees, now we've got the debt paid down, we have some projects coming up, but now we've got this confidence level of the data of what we've got. We've seen our growth over time. Now we can start thinking about a balance between the obligatory projects and the aspirational projects.
And what kind of aspirational is going on in South Florida? Just give a scope of what some of these investments are.
Sure. So again, like much of the country, there's a big push for pickleball. So where do you put pickleball? For us, we are very tied with water on one side, for highway on another, neighborhood. We don't have a lot of land to work with. So it's about trying to repurpose all the land that we've got, trying to look not only at the existing land, but what's going down look like, what's going up look like. And so pickleball, it's also taking advantage of, again, talking about some of the things we learned from COVID, outdoor dining. So we were building a new outdoor dining facility. We've got a clubhouse that is the biggest noose around our neck right now. We have two clubhouses, and the country club needs a renovation, but nobody wants to spend a dime on it because we don't really have a plan for it, and we're not really sure how we want to amenitize it. It would be easy just to put up new wallpaper and curtains and carpet, but that doesn't really solve anything, and it doesn't really advance us, because where we are, it's very much an arms race, is like I like to call it, from amenitizing your facilities. And we are sort of in the bottom part of the upper level part of the market, if that makes sense, what I just said. We're not a gigantic community with thousands of members, but we still have those members who go and see those clubs, and then they have certain levels of expectations for the amenities. So again, we talked about pickleball, but now it's also looking at some of the things that were popular in the past. So bocce and croquet don't have quite the following. So what do? We start to track the data of what kind of usage do you have, and Now I'm arguing with people saying, no, it's very popular. A lot of people come out. And so I'm saying, I know you love croquet. I know you love bocce, but here's the usage. And then you start tying it in with, you start juxtaposing it with tennis and pickleball. And we say, and here's the usage of that. And here are the times where, we've reached capacity. So we know we've got demand. And again, these are emotional conversations for a lot of people, but we try and do what we can to take that emotion out of it with the data.
So I think across the country, many people are facing this compaction on the golf course. So how have you dealt with that? Obviously, Sagacity's got a great tool to utilize that, but what do you see? What does the data show, and how have you reacted to that as a company? Yeah, that's really to you guys.
I was going to say who, because I got rounds problems too.
Well, the first thing we did is we raised the price. It's just, but like even then, because we have so many different silos that fill it, and some things like what we realized, where I said we lost $1 million was, we're getting to a point. We'll never get there because it doesn't make sense, but literally where you just don't have pricing anymore, where the price changes every day depending on the time. Could be like you walk in and that shirt today's $38 and tomorrow it's $97 and the hot dog's $12 and today it's $27 based on demand and how you want to flow it. And I think I just lost track of the
Rounds. What are you
Sorry,
doing?
dang it. Rounds. So we know that there's a line where we have the best service and the best course conditions, and we know that round for us is like about 48,500 rounds. The peak of COVID, we did 70,000 rounds. So we tried to lower it, and we still had 70,000 rounds. Now, mind you, it didn't rain for the whole year in the state of California, and we had perfect, great weather, and it's, we're right on the beach. But so what we've done since then is we've continued to raise rates. We've gotten really smart with how we book our groups. We try to create some open availability so that we can have the impulse golfer, like the resort guest, which is ultimately the best customer that we could have, is one of the, because Monarch sits in Orange County, in Dana Point. We have a 5-star resort, the Waldorf Astoria. We're also the direct conduit for the Ritz-Carlton and for the Montage. So we know if the phone rings and it's from these 3 hotels and they want to play golf, we're going to make the most amount of money. That avatar is the best avatar. But at the time, we didn't have any availability. So when they called, we had to turn them away. So then you start creating blocks, and then you can use blocks. We took our intervals and expanded them. And now we're down to a level of about 59,000 rounds, and we just continually push the rate forward. When you plug in all the Sagacity tools, that's what's really allowing us to drive average rate. And obviously the margin on a round of golf at 59,000 rounds is exceptionally good. But we do care about like the right type of volume, because we also like these guys, we take the same, it's not just for us golf. Like we have a retail space. We have a 1,400 square foot retail store. Last year we did $2.7 million. So that's now a $2.7 million operation. I've got a modified food and beverage operation. We do about $3 million. So we have to take the same analytics to those. But if I drive my rounds too low, then I don't have enough ancillary spend. So then I have to do all these analytics of like, well, if I go down in rounds, how do I grow food and beverage, and how do I go retail? We literally have to sit through all these models and have to go through it, because we have to be very careful that we don't, again, you flip a switch or you turn it off, it could negatively affect you by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Sure.
Of your peers in Southern California, how many of them that are in public resort daily fee operation, who else are you talking to about this stuff?
Well, there's, obviously the people who work for me.
Yeah, but I'm
the
talking
resorts.
the resorts up and down the coast.
Well, I can tell you right now that most of the 5-star resorts, most of the better clubs have revenue managers, or are getting them, or utilize the hotel's revenue managers. But it's definitely something that's much more prevalent today than it's ever been. But again, I don't think everyone has fully embraced it 100%. They haven't embraced it the exact way that we have, which I would recommend. And I know it's going to take time, but I could tell you that in the next 5 years, 10 years, as these resorts are getting, as operators turn over and people they're looking for employment opportunities, as these companies sell and buy these resorts, when they, like when they sold our resort, what happened when they sold our resort? Well, one time, I can't remember his name, but he ran Club Corp, came in and personally audited me to determine whether or not they were going to fire me, retain me, fire our management company, retain them. And I got a 2-hour interview, and I could promise you that we passed because I'm still there.
Yeah. So
But twofold. One is I could have easily failed that and been let go because it just didn't make sense. But what I'm trying to say is when these jobs come up along the coast at these higher end properties, the word revenue management better be in that job, your job, not your job description, but your resume. And then when they ask you about it, you better be able to articulate what that means to you and have backup and evidence. Yeah. I have that, so I'm okay.
So you feel secure in your
I feel
career.
secure today, but because the analytics can change tomorrow,
Yeah, but
I don't feel that secure.
But even if they change, you can speak to it, and you can take action on it, and you can deal with it.
Yeah, like I can handle
Whether it's
myself.
going up or down,
Like I felt very comfortable in the room talking about this in front of people who have college educations that are different than mine. Now, I was a political science major at UCLA in international relations, so I can negotiate a peace treaty. But some of these things I've had to learn on the fly and on the run, and we still learn. Like we learn daily. We don't stop learning. We don't stop improving on what we try to do. So.
Right. So again, we'll build on that. So on the private side, you're measured on more member experience than revenue. How do you provide data on that, or how do you use that member experience or measure it?
Sure. Difficult to measure in some ways, but there's always a measurement. We just closed this last weekend. We closed a member survey that we're doing through club benchmarking. So we've never really done a fulsome survey. So this will at least give us a benchmark, which will help us. And really, it's about giving us feedback on our operations, but also about how we can plan for the future. So it'll be a big piece of what the strategic planning committee will be looking at as they're planning ahead. And then as we do subsequent surveys year after year, it'll give us a little bit more feedback on, okay, how are we doing relative to history? I like a survey. I think it's you don't want to hide behind it. You don't want to be too afraid of it. And I think you just want to give it the right amount of weight wherever you are. I tell a lot of people when they talk, they'll come to us and say, members will say, well, we need to do a survey to see what people want to eat. And we need to do a survey to see what they like on the menu. I said, I've got my survey right here. It's called a sales report. And so again, that's on a lower level of the things that you're using to manage your operation. Satisfaction. I've got a group of members say, a lot of people are really unhappy with the restaurant. And I said, that's interesting. I said, of course we hear complaints, and I worked for Four Seasons for 15 years, and if you had 100 covers and you didn't have at least 6 really good complaints, you probably weren't reporting all of the complaints. So, but what I say to them is, what's interesting, we've done more covers and we do more revenue, and people are coming at a much larger pace than they ever had, and they were joining the club. So something's got to be going right. Again, so I try and hold the sarcasm back a little bit more than that, but that's a joke. And and I think the more you can use. Again, we talk about a survey, but we talk about all your data that you're using to try and prove points. Because again, you get in these boardrooms and you get somebody who says, you know what, the soup was bad yesterday. We need to do something's got to be going wrong in food and beverage. It's like, well, again, the covers are way up, the average check is way up. People are choosing to stay with us as opposed to longer than they were in years past. So something overall about the club is going right. And I think don't be afraid of that data, but try and use it. Make sure you're telling this, you're digging into it for what it is.
Yeah, and then just following up on the golf compaction, talk about your membership and your membership size and how that impacts your business model based on what your assets are?
Yeah, so from a golf standpoint, we have a cap of 400 memberships. We were getting close to 390 about a year ago. And the board, like a lot of your clubs, if you're at a private club, said, gosh, we've got too many golfers. We should stop selling memberships. And, you know, for me, it's like, that's the record scratch. Like, time out what? That's our capital dollars. That's how we're paying. That's how we're going to pay down debt. And they said, no, we need to, we'll go up to a number, but then we'll ease back over time. And so, you know, I tried to hammer it home until literally one day I'm in the boardroom saying, all right, you just realized by what you're doing, that's $250,000 from the bottom line that's going to be gone, that we're never going to see again, just to have a little more, potentially some more tee times. South Florida PGA and Club Benchmarking did some great work, and I know you did some work at some other clubs taking a look at all the different levers you can pull. Be very careful as we talked. Finally got across to our board, like, oh wait, we don't want to do that. We should try and be selling out at every possible moment that we can from the membership side. So we took a look at our intervals, and we went from 10-minute intervals to 8-minute intervals, and we wove in a few more shotguns so we can maximize the tee sheet at certain times. And you know, again, I think most people, we don't hear about that so much, and I think as we've educated more of our committee members, not necessarily the membership as a whole, but a little bit with the committees trying to get the word out of, we don't really want to have less members. Like, it sounds good to have, you know, I would love to have a club that had 250 members. You just know that now everybody is going to have to pay 50% more to cover what everybody else, the freight that everybody else was carrying, because, you know, to turn on the lights and versus for no people versus turning on the lights and opening the golf course for one person there's not a lot of difference. There's, you know, or sorry, for 100 people, there's not a ton of difference. You're doing a lot of those similar things. So now we're starting to get more deeper into the labor analysis that we're using. You know, at Four Seasons, it was all about labor standards. So you knew on a Tuesday in May, this was how many hours of valet parkers you should have. And if you flexed higher than that, there had to be a bona fide business reason for it. Of course, they were always happy if you went lower, but you know, you had your standard. And so we're having to sort of come back to educate the managers, but now also to educate the board and the committees using those metrics as to why we're making certain decisions. You know, the other thing we're getting into is payroll and compensation. I touched on it, looking at different positions, not just my position, but you know, all of our key department heads, taking a look at what they're doing, how they're compensated. Are we staying ahead of the market? Because you know, that labor, the attrition in labor, the retention of employees is a huge problem for us, much like many other people. So we're trying to see trying to understand where we are. We say we want to be in the top 10% of the market. Are we in the top 10% of the market? What do we know about the market? You know, we're blessed that there are so many clubs in the Boca area that Club Benchmarking actually has a Boca section of their analysis. So I can go to my board and say, oh, by the way, we're underpaying these core positions, and we need to beef that up. And they've been really receptive to that. Again, it's easy when I go in there and I say I think, or what I'm seeing, or what I feel. But when I have hard data, it's not me talking, it's the data doing the talking. And so, I think back to the days when I was in San Diego and we were doing really guerrilla analytics of pick up the phone, calling golf shop, because it used to be, well, we'll just go on their website. And I remember John McNair saying, don't go on the website, call the golf shop. The golf shop's always going to have a lower price. And I always laughed, and like half the time he was right. But so we did this deep analysis on what everybody else was doing as we were trying to see what the market was doing. Well, now instead of having to spend a week doing analysis to gather that, the important analysis to me is I go to, like what you can do with Sagacity, you can do with Club Benchmarking. And I promise you, this is not a sales pitch for Club Benchmarking. If there was somebody else in that space, I would mention their names. There's just nobody else for my purposes in that space. So we go to that and we pull up those metrics and we take a look at them, and then we try and make the decisions that are best based on that data.
Yeah. So when we look at, dues and labor, I think we're all dealing with that. But in the private club, and then obviously in the resort business, how does driving the income or the dues and labor, how do they relate to each other and how you run the business?
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, we work off of margins and percentages of revenue. So, like we do a weekly staff meeting. We get a daily flash. Let's back up. We have a daily flash report that sort of gives us a running snapshot of how we're doing financially through the month. So I look at that every day, and about a third through the month, I can forecast the rest of the month fairly accurately. I've gotten fairly decent at that, and I will end up doing that, and then I'll sit down with my team. I'll bring them into a meeting individually or collectively, and we'll talk through what we need to see. We could either spend more money, we can get more aggressive with service and sales. We could address some of the deferred maintenance or whatever, what have you. Or on the flip side, like we just went through this exercise with the rain, I was able to do all this, and I could probably get within, I don't know, a few $1,000s of where we'll end up. And I noticed that we were going to miss. We're obviously it rained 9 days already in the month of January, so we're going to miss significantly our revenue mark. And then, so how do you mitigate that? Because they want us to be able to flex payroll, and they want us to flex expenses if you can. There's a lot of fixed costs that you can't really flex, like salaried employees and turn on the lights and things like that. So we use this data to help guide some of the direction, the business decisions that we're going to make. And where all this comes into play, like all this data is important so that you can make quick, immediate operational changes that will positively affect your business outcome. Whether that's in sales, whether that's like top line revenue, and certainly through the bottom line revenue. Because at the end of the day, that's what's the most important, is how you bring it to the bottom line. And I mean, there's things that we do. I mean, obviously, everyone who's in this space understands, like, even if you beat budget, it's like, what's your flow through compared to like the revenue that you've made? I mean, we had such a great run for 20, 30 months that we at Monarch, and I'm sure a lot of people are in the same boat, we broke our own record month, 30 straight months. So we beat every expectation, every category. There wasn't anything we could talk about except how to like beat budget by 39% instead of 38%. But now, because of all that, you get into the flow through. So we started analyzing our flow through a little bit better, and now that's what we're focusing on more. And the team's getting better at it, and that's how we apply it, like with payroll and some of our business decisions.
Yeah, from us for payroll, it's our bottom line is really about member experience, making sure that's maintained. So when we see that we have these financial dips or something happen, again, as I say, thankfully the private clubs were not so beholden to the bad weather days. Mm-hmm. There's that revenue, our dues revenue, like I think of most clubs, is sort of lives in that 45 to 55% of your total revenue range. And more often than not, your payroll tends to mirror that in some way, in most ways as well. So for us, when we see, we're falling behind something, or we've had, it's usually less about falling behind revenue as it is about spending too much in another area, we will take a look at labor and we'll look at those opportunities. And, the first question is it going to sacrifice the member experience? Okay, if the answer is no, then what can we do and how long can we do it for? For instance, we've got a manager who's leaving for another job. Great for him. We helped him get the job. But now, should we replace his position right away? Do we have a little bit of a lull in the business where we can hold off? And again, again, using the term margins, I mean, it's silly, but like that's, for me, I look at that as like a slush fund is like, okay, I don't have to spend it. I'm not here to burn the members' cash. But if I can put that away, I'm still not trying to carry it to the bottom line by the end of the year, but I want to have that set aside so that when we have something else that comes up that we want to do, or we want to pay some people a little bit more, then we have those types of things. So, it's not a deep analysis like on the T sheet, but I love a flash report as well. We do at least twice a month. We're taking a look at our labor, seeing where we're trending with overtime, total payroll, how we're doing with our full-time equivalents that are on staff, and trying to spot trends. And the trends, it's usually pretty simple, and we've had some trends, and we've done a good job of correcting them. But you have a conversation with your chef, and he says, no, I need these people. I'm like, well, we're doing the same volumes that we've done for the last 5 years, and you've got 5 more people than you had before. So what's different? You know, and so you have to, you know, you get in those emotional conversations, not just with the members, but with the staff. And then once they see the numbers, then sometimes that can help bring them back down to, you know, a little different reality.
Awesome. That was an hour right there, ladies and gentlemen. Before we go, does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask? Yes.
How do you incorporate and how does the speed of play affect what you're doing?
Well, I mean,
Well,
how does the speed of play impact some of the decisions we might make, you mean?
yeah, pace of play.
Pace of play?
Yeah, let me answer that
Yeah, no,
question.
please.
Because I was on a panel yesterday with Tag Marshall, and you know what they do is they build a baseline of flow-through data on the golf course, right? So they put devices, whether it's on a cart or whether it's in your hand, that measures the pace of play around the golf course. And so once they get a baseline for that, they find the choke points of the golf course. They find out that the days of the week, the hours of the day where the pace of play varies. Because if you hit on the point about pace of play is the number 2 consideration right under condition of course in terms of what drives satisfaction of the golf course, right, of the consumer. So. Well, yes, and of course revenue, because pace of play adds to the satisfaction level, and the satisfaction level adds to the demand, and the demand leads to the revenue, right? So they all kind of run hand in hand. So what they did at Fieldstone, and we'll talk about it tomorrow morning in our 10 o'clock session where Chip will join us. They changed the intervals in the mornings on certain days of the week because that's when the pace of play was, just under 4 hours. And then they changed the pace of play to open up, or change the intervals to open up more tee time inventory to sell more rounds of golf. So, so pace of play is critical in a couple of different ways.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we have this mantra that we live by. It's the 4 pillars of success. It's employee voice, customer voice, top line revenue, and bottom line revenue. So when it comes to customer voice, which is right at the very top of how important that we have to focus on, obviously pace of play is like one of our biggest customer service complaints. We utilize Players First, which provides us the feedback from all our golfers. Pace of play would be that, and there's a couple other things that always stand out. One of the examples, like how we've changed our intervals a lot. We've tweaked things. We've gotten smarter about how we can manage the operation. But we discovered, like through COVID, just sort of by chance, we started flipping our nines. The way our golf course was designed, it's for whatever reason, at some point they flipped the nines. It wasn't. The routing today is not the routing that Bruce Charlton and Robert Jones Jr. originally envisioned when they built and opened the property. But when we know on like our 4 busiest days, we tee off number 10, not number 1. You still play 18 holes. You still play all of the same 18 holes. You just play them in a different order. We know that the course plays 10 minutes faster, meaning we can actually take one of our blocks and use it for a VIP or what have you, or a member that's been complaining because they haven't been out, and we won't slow down the tee sheet, and it helps us eliminate some of those complaints, which we care just as much about. Like in our operation, we talk about metrics. Like Sagacity is hyper important for us, and the analytics are hyper important for us to make good, proper business decisions. But if we get like really poopy report card back from all of our customers, we wouldn't have good retention, and we would have high turnover, and that's going to be exponentially more expensive for us to sell and market to. So it's hyper critical. We analyze it every single day, 4 or 5 times a day.
Pace of play.
Pace of play.
Yeah.
We have meetings about it. We religiously review it. If there's an issue, we get together and we talk and discuss. We have a 100% retention goal. I have a 5-hour guarantee. If you go over 5 hours, I tell my team, just give them their money back. Just give them a voucher because we failed them. But to get to that point, we have to fail ourselves like 7 or 8 ways because of the effort that we put forth to make it happen.
Thank you. Well, you can get started in a conversation about your performance today by signing up for PGA Operations Benchmark. That's the easiest way to start your journey. You can go right to the expert level by calling either of our companies to talk about how we can help you guys directly. Thank you, Jim, Rob, Eric.
Thank you.
Very much.
Okay.